Let's get started. Greetings to everybody. I just saw someone calling in from New Bern, North Carolina, where one of our colleagues is stationed full-time. So nice to see that there's some density in this small town for planned giving and for fundraising. Thanks to everyone who introduced themselves. Keep doing that if you get a chance. Just know that if you're going to use the chat, selecting all attendees. And apologies to folks who heard me singing to myself as I was getting started. I thought I was muted, but just trying to warm up a little bit. The recordings and slides will be sent around later today. I'll keep video on so that anyone who needs to read lips can do so. There's also a lot of text on the slides so that if that's a bit easier. And also if you're hard of sight, we'll be describing a lot of it. So we should be able to make do for most people here. And my only big apologies is to the folks in Hawaii who are routinely waking up at 6 a.m. to come to these. So let's get rolling. Today we're going to talk about fall events and how to make those successful regardless of the times that we're in. We're really lucky to have a great guest today as well, and I'll introduce her in a little bit. A quick note is that today's session is also, as usual, thanks to my colleague Simone and all of her work, available for 1 credit hour for CFRE. So as many of you are doing your professional development and also sort of budget constrained, we're really happy to make these things free and hopefully as useful as possible on top of being able to give you credit for these. So quick intros, some background on events and what you've said in 2020. We have an expert guest who I'll introduce in a bit, some additional strategies for fall events, and then we'll get to next steps in Q&A. So many of you know my name is Patrick. I'm the co-founder of FreeWill, alongside my great, wonderful co-founder, Jenny Xia. More specifically, we get to be part of the FreeWill family. So about 60 folks, usually based in New York City. We've got a lot of wonderful partners, I think coming close to 400 nonprofits that we get to support, primarily working in bequests and qualified charitable distributions and stocks, and especially at this moment, helping take a lot of those things online. So really lucky to support a lot of folks, and really welcoming to all the new partners who've joined it recently. Before we sort of get into the stats of the week, I did want to name that I think this week has been particularly challenging, even more so than the last few months, for a lot of our staff, for a lot of our partners, for a lot of fundraisers across the country, particularly fundraisers of color. We know we've talked to a lot of folks who are in need of support. We've talked to a lot of folks who are actively looking inside their own organizations about how to make change. That's certainly something that we're doing here. And so there's just a lot on people's minds. And I want to say, if you get distracted listening to this today, if you feel like you need to log off and just take time for yourself, either now or sort of across the week, I hope you do that. And I hope you're taking care of yourself and really looking after people that need it. We've also been asked by a lot of folks about recommendations on diversity and inclusion, which is frankly something that FreeWill is okay at, but needs to get significantly better. But also we'll start doing a couple of sessions on that coming up, including the first one in 2 weeks, so that we can put together some really practical, tactical tips on diversity, equity, and inclusion at your nonprofit, even in a time when budgets are constrained or you're not hiring as much. So look forward to that. Those will be big, really important conversations. And just thanks for all the work you're doing in a difficult period. When we ask people, as we do every week, how you're feeling, you can see that this week is a real shift from last week, which is actually 2 weeks ago in terms of the last webinar and the last survey. So happiness has sort of dropped considerably. Anxiety has come up to a pretty significant degree. Good to see loneliness trending down, but just wanted to name that a lot of people on this call, a lot of people in your organizations, a lot of people in the world are feeling anxious now and less happy than they were 2 weeks ago. Happier, and that people this moment as a moment for change. In terms of things that are worried about, these have really started to even out. It may be that we don't continue to ask about this, but people are still concerned about hitting goals, about the safety of coworkers, doing the jobs well, etc. And so you can see relatively even trends after a pretty volatile first few weeks. All right, let's talk about events and fundraising events in particular. Just a quick note, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, it's hard to tell at this point, we did run a session on smaller events, on stewardship events, on a couple of really fun things to do. So go check out that recording if you like. This week is going to be really focused on large dollar, significant fundraising events. So just wanted to put some context in there. We've asked folks whether they were having big fundraising events this fall. 84% had planned to have in-person events. 12% said we weren't, and then a few folks said we don't actually hold events at all. So this is the context. 84% of the nonprofits joining today were planning to have events this fall and are now trying to figure out what to do. In terms of figuring out what to do, this is the range of responses. So almost 40% are moving those events to virtual, 8% are postponing, 6% are simply canceling and just doing away with it. 6% are really changing the format of the events. 5% are still planning to hold the event in person. So some of these may be outdoors or something that you can do a little bit more safely. And then 30%, which is a pretty meaningful chunk, are still evaluating. And so we're hoping to really help the 30% today, and also the 37% think about how to do this really excellently. We also asked people who've had fundraising events in the last few months what actually happened. And while the biggest section here is about 47% who said they did not meet goals, that actually means that more than half of folks with their event either met goals or exceeded them. So a third of people exceeded the goals they were expecting, which is pretty striking given the shifts in the way these events were carried out. 20% met goals. And so there's some real positive signs here, but also a real chance of missing. So we need to start uncovering what is the difference between the events that are exceeding goals and what's the difference between the events that are not. And how do we make sure we're moving from category 2 into category 1 as much as possible? So we've talked about this a little bit, but we keep adjusting it. And a lot of this is looking at different recommendations from epidemiologists, overall trends in different parts of the country opening up, but also at different sectors. So when we look at Q3, which would be July, September, the idea is that these events are not happening in person for the most part, and your action step is to move to virtual. Beyond that, October and December, we still think it's very unlikely that you're going to have in-person events, especially indoors. In most parts of the country, it's very difficult to hold outdoor events October to December. And so you want to make no purchases here and prepare to move to virtual events. Even looking forward to Q1 2021, which is sort of winter spring season, it's probably less than 50% likely that you're going to have an in-person event, especially if it's indoors. And so you want to treat an event as plan B and start the preparation to move to virtual. And then beyond that, we just don't know. It's not clear when the world will return to quote unquote normal or what we think of it. And so you might not want to bank on anything happening past April. And so keeping your eyes and ears open and also your options open as we get farther afield. So this isn't great news to share, but it also is really important to have a realistic view on what might be happening. All right, so the big question then is, okay, this world is changing. We need to figure out how to do this and run effectively. In many cases, we are more in need of funding than ever, either because our missions have become even more important or because elective surgeries or on-campus funding and other things have dried up a bit. And so these events are more important than ever, but also difficult to pull off. So the big question is, what should we do now? And for that, I don't have all the answers. I'm really excited to welcome Tiffany Parnes, who is the Director of Capital Campaigns and Special Events at Perry Davis Associates. This is Tiffany with her wonderful husband, both of whom are much better dressers than I am, as you might know. But Tiffany grew up in Switzerland, and so has a really international lens, went to NYU, actually got her start not in nonprofit fundraising, but in complex logistics around travel events and leisure travel events. And so we might think some of our galas are tricky, but you should try organizing Passover services for 1,000 people, which is something that Tiffany did. And beyond that, in sort of full takeover of resorts and all these highly, highly complex things that Tiffany did with grace and elegance and excellence. And so PDA, which is Perry Davis Associates, which is one of the leading nonprofit fundraisers, snatched her up and said, this woman's perfect to help bring that private sector expertise to the nonprofit world. And so PDA's been around for about 30 years, have a lot of expertise in major gifts, in events, also do a lot of things like back office. So they're holding mail and being the address of record for a lot of folks as well, which is more important these days. So I'm super excited to welcome Tiffany and have everyone benefit from her experience as mine. So Tiffany, feel free to unmute, turn your video on, and we'll get rolling. Great. Welcome, Tiffany. I'm also going to stop sharing screen for a little bit so we can see you full face. Welcome. Tiffany, before we get started, I do want to point out to everybody who's listening, I'll help you unmute now. Let me know if that works.
Great.
Excellent. So before we get started, I just want to point out that I learned this morning that the incredible painting over Tiffany's left shoulder was actually done by Tiffany. So if you're impressed by nothing else in the next 15 minutes, you know that. Tiffany, welcome. Obviously, this has been a really challenging week for most of us, for many of our teams, for organizations. But what is one thing, if there's anything, that's bringing you joy this week?
Yes, it's certainly been a challenging, trying week. My source of joy is I was able to see my brother for the first time in person since January at a safe distance, but it was so wonderful to see him in person. It was hard not to hug him, but still grateful to have seen him.
That's interesting. I actually had the same experience. I saw two of my younger brothers for the first time this weekend since everything started, and it was sort of, wish we could have been closer, but it was really, really nice. All right, well, let's dive into it because I know a lot of people have big questions and hopefully we have some answers together. A lot of people have big plans for the fall. Are you recommending canceling? Are you recommending moving, keeping it in person from an event standpoint? What's your expert opinion there?
Sure. So first off, I would say do not cancel, especially if this large grossing event is one of your main sources of annual income. I think it's also important to remember that an event is a valuable donor touch point. So it's important not to lose that touch point, use that touch point, right? You want to use it as an opportunity to engage with your constituents in a different way. It's also true for many organizations that their narrative and operations have changed in the past 3-4 months. And it's a great platform to connect with your donors and update them and what you've been up to. So that leaves in person or virtual. I would recommend going virtual for many reasons, two of which I would say comfort level. As you've shared, it's going to take a while for people to feel comfortable to be in a room together for an extended amount of time. And the climate for events for the fall that we're seeing right now, the trend, many speaking engagements and even bigger conferences like the UN General Assembly, they're all going virtual. And then I would say for a fall event, you need to start planning now. Organizations need to get their ducks in a row now. And with this limited information that we have, virtual is the recommendation.
That makes sense. So basically, part of it is this is the most likely, and part of it is you need to start acting. So this is the path you should pick. But also, I think a lot of people wonder, is it really possible to hold a high revenue virtual event? Can that be done, or are we just battening down the hatches and cutting costs this year?
Yes, that's the big question. Can you be financially successful? I'll say optimistically, yes. I've seen it happen already with a past client last week. It's hard, but it can happen for other reasons, such as you can still be charging the same prices for sponsorships and tickets and tables. It's a healthy time to start changing the attitudes as well of that, purchasing something versus contributing as it relates to a gala. Especially, it's also possible your expenses should be lower, so you're netting more. I will say though, and especially from the pie chart that we just saw, it's important to still stay realistic about your financial goal. I think I've had organizations that have the recommendation is, and I hope that everyone has checked in with all of their key stakeholders by this time, and if they're noticing that they've suffered huge financial setbacks, then it's you have to stay realistic and say, maybe I'm not going to raise the same as I have last year, and that's okay. But I would say that prep work is so key in order to be financially successful.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about prep work in a moment, but I thought it was really interesting to double down because we always talk about how much money was raised at a gala and rarely what the net outcome is. And so thinking about your own goals this time, if you raise $100,000 just to keep the math easy, but it costs you $35,000, and this year you might have significantly lower costs, your goal can be a little bit lower and your organization can still come out ahead. So that's a key point that I think a lot of people forget. So thank you, Tiffany, for raising that. You talked about the need to get started early. What are some of the first steps, especially for those of us that have run fewer galas or big events? with the sophistication that you have?
Sure. I think very specific to this time, and you're going to hear me say this again and again, so I hope I'm not a broken record, but is really spending time speaking to your stakeholders, getting their temperature, understanding, are they up for a virtual event? Should they adapt? What would they like to see? So if you have their support, I think you're halfway there. For larger grossing events, for gala specifically, you want to secure your honorees and chairs as soon as you can. You're to plan also, you're obviously going to set your date according to your honorees and chairs. You're going to set a timeline, define your goals. That's a big one, especially for virtual events around this time. Setting your budget, it's going to look a little different this year. It's important to understand. And I would also say the personality of your event is important. It's going to be front and center, especially virtually. Maybe there's a theme this year. Very important, I would also say, for planning is forming your working gala committee. I would say virtually, it's important to involve as many lay leaders as you can, to be able to assign them a task, even if it's a very small one, to keep them engaged throughout the whole planning process and have them attend and feel excited about it. The primary focus of a virtual gala committee, as with any gala committee, would be fundraising, though there's 3 aspects that are a little different. You would ideally like to have 1 or 2 people focusing on tech, right? Identifying the right platforms for what you're trying to achieve. Program also, the program is going to be very important. Virtually, it's not as run-of-the-mill. You want to be engaging and creative, which brings me to the 3rd important point. It's my hobby horse about virtual events, and that's activity and engagement ideas for your supporters. So you want your gala committee and everyone to really be thinking about how you can be highly interactive and creative and put your energy towards that.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's go first to sort of chairs and honorees, and then we can go to some of these pre-event activities and the overall activities. What actually makes a good honoree, and does that change at all with virtual events?
I would say, so regardless of virtual or in-person events, a good honoree or chair, you want their name to have gravitas, maybe meaning just to your community, but a name that would excite attendees and want them to be involved. Definitely a large network, and more importantly, a network that they're willing to tap into for you, right? The keyword is lists. It'd be wonderful if they could solicit on your behalf. Will they be sending out their own emails, personal notes, making phone calls? That's definitely a dream for every nonprofit. Giving a significant contribution themselves. So that's sort of virtual or in person, stays constant. For virtual, I would say a plus would be is if they have a great online presence.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be important.
That makes sense. And one thing that's interesting in these is that somebody who might have a great network and be really passionate about you can actually invite people outside of, say, the New York metropolitan area or Chicago or wherever the gala may be, that actually you may be able to have a much larger network from your chairs this time than you would in a normal context, where people are both busy, but also maybe not within 100 miles to get there. So that's a cool opportunity on top of being a challenge. You mentioned a lot about how, at a normal gala, people get to hang out, drink wine with each other, there's food. They don't feel the need to have like an activity to the same degree. But in virtual, where there's not as much interaction, there really needs to be something that they actively do instead of just watch. What are some ideas for what that might look like?
Sure. So I think there are 2 buckets. I would say an activity that they can do before the event that can culminate the night of the event. By way of example, one of my clients, it's a municipal garden. They had a gala last week, and we were thinking about how we can engage and bring the gala into the physical home of everyone. Their annual gala is called the Rose Gala because at the at this time, the rose garden blooms, and it's beautiful. And they host the gala at the garden, and people get to spend time there and smell the roses. So we said, how can we bring the garden to them? And we thought of this idea of a virtual garden. So when the attendees received their invitation and their details, they were asked to bring their own interpretation of a rose to the night of the gala, whether that be having the physical rose, or we sent out a stencil for people to get creative at home. Then the night of, we said, be prepared to show off your roses, and we took a big picture of the virtual garden, and it'll serve as a nice placeholder until they can physically be there. We also, in the same vein, if people weren't feeling creative and just wanted to perhaps enjoy the evening, sent out a recipe to create a rose-like cocktail. We wanted to go as far as to even send something in the mail, like a rose tonic for a cocktail, or a candle, so that, if you're missing the scent of the roses, we'll bring them to you. So just this idea of having an activity for people to do when they're at home, but then also being able to show it off the night of. I'll give one more example because I love this one too. I was talking to a theater, and we thought, how about the theme for the evening could be a masquerade ball, right? Everyone's at home in their pajamas. How about people dress up, and we can send them a mask kit so that they can decorate their own mask, and we'll suggest put it on a chopstick or a straw or whatnot, and we could sort of have drama and flair for the evening, that glitz and glam they weren't able to have in person. So that's the activity that would culminate the night of. And separately, I think that there has to be an activity that is engaging people during the program. So a great idea that we're talking to with another organization is hiring a choir master. The idea of singing and learning how to put together a song on virtually. I've attended many Zoom birthdays, and singing happy birthday, it's not a nice sound, I would say. So this organization really thrives on song, and so they're hiring a choir master and having that activity. So that's just one example, but having this constant feeling of engagement is so important, I think.
Amazing. I'm going to share my screen for a moment because so many people are looking for really, really tactical advice, and you actually put together a sample agenda. So give me just a moment to get that rolling. But I'd love for you to walk us through that.
Sure. So yes, this is a sample evening run of show. Again, every organization is different. Orders might be different. You may or may not do some of these, but I thought it'd be helpful to have something more tangible to look at. The stars that you see here represent times where you want to touch your donors. These, again, this sort of engagement idea. You want your attendees to often feel like they're called on. You constantly need something from them. So you want at least 3. Here I have, I think, 6. You want to have an MC. I think having an enthusiastic personality that constantly engages with your attendees is so important. The virtual gala that I was just chatting about, they had their MC acknowledge people on their screens as the event was starting, saying, you can even ask your attendee to unmute and share the recipe of the cocktail that they so thoughtfully prepared. And just really acknowledging who's in the room, making sure that they're seen. We have words from your executive director or board chair, really setting the tone. Again, this message, this tight-knit message, organization backgrounds and highlights. You also at this time want to mention the activity or entertainment that's coming up later in the evening, constantly having them feel like something's coming up. A video, it's a great time to hire a video editor and create a great, really focused video that represents your organization. I will say, I did attend a virtual gala that they shared their screen for their video, but did not share their audio. So helpful tip. Then if you're having a guest speaker, I love the idea of having a Q&A portion, and not just between a moderator and the guest speaker, but also have your attendees give them an ability to ask a few questions, right? So again, keeping them engaged. Donor acknowledgments, it's an important topic because it is different, slightly different from a in-person event. Virtually, your donors aren't going to have the same feeling of hosting a table and going in front of the step and repeat. So it's important to carve out some time to acknowledge your donors. It's possible on Zoom to put them in the frame as you acknowledge them. There's also softwares that you can have sort of a, scroll going left to right with the donors' names, but very important to keep them top of mind. I have here a State of the Union from the Executive Director or Board Chair. This is when you can update everyone in terms of what's been going on the last 3 months. Have your needs changed? Are you running a special campaign now because of the need to pivot? The testimonials and live ask. I think storytelling is incredibly important, especially virtually. Having the ability to have your many beneficiaries chime in for a few minutes, being able to talk about their own experiences, pulling at those heartstrings right before you have a live ask. The live ask can be in many different forms. Some organizations might employ silent auctions, mobile bidding, text to give. You can also be as simple as to say, I hope that you have been moved tonight. We have just sent an email link to everyone. It's popping up in your inbox. If you feel so moved, we'd love to feel it. So a live ask is important. Then again, the activity, the idea of engagement. And then of course you'll, as in most galas, a presentation to your honoree. You can still have a short clip. I love the idea of having constituents and different people close to the honoree have a selfie video, right? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And then you hire a video editor and put together a nice presentation to the honoree and or honorees. And last but not least, a physical toast, right? You can't be there in person, but you still want to toast them. So all in all, we kept this to 45 minutes. That's an ideal time for a virtual gala. People fatigue very easily. People can leave very easily on a virtual event as opposed to an in-person event. So you want to keep it short and sweet, just like the title.
Great. I mean, it's really striking. A typical gala might be 2+ hours, 45 minutes, but also really powerful and a lot of great stuff. Excellent. All right. So we're almost at time, but I wanted to maybe, we're really lucky that Tiffany's going to stick around for questions. So feel free to pile those into the Q&A function and we'll get to some of those. But what's maybe 1 or 2 tips for just fundraising effectively and making sure that not just that the event is excellent, but that a lot of people come and it raises a lot of money?
Sure. It's funny, fundraising itself and asking for money hasn't necessarily changed, except for the fact that you can't ask for it in person. But I would say calling donors more than once, Sending an email or two, or having your, especially for galas, lay leaders have their list of people that they email out to. It's not enough. We're getting so many emails. We're inundated. You don't want them to miss your email. So encouraging lay leaders to make those phone calls, have more touch points. Even, try the old-fashioned way, handwritten notes. Because we're so digital, and even because this event is virtual, does not mean everything has to be digital. You can even approve a handwritten note with an important lay leader, an honoree, and then have your staff send them out. I would say to adopt a new practice, maybe it's actually not a new practice, because peer-to-peer fundraising has existed before the crisis, but it's a good time to employ it. Asking your key fundraisers to set up a page, help them setting up a page, posting a video message on the page, helping them set financial goals with not only themselves, but also with what they're trying to raise. And then supporting them in that effort is very important. Giving them an FAQ sheet, emails, scripts, and templates, and also a timeline with benchmarks, right? Helping them understand what's successful, when should they be ramping up, 1 month before, 2 weeks before, what do you do at those times? And, as with all fundraising, I think checking in, holding your fundraisers accountable, but also helping them feel supported is very important.
Those are great tips. I think maybe only two things I would add for folks is there's really sort of two interesting trends happening at the same time. One is there's a lot of volunteer energy and not a lot of volunteer opportunities. And so you may be able to open up your fundraising to volunteers to a much greater degree. And if you can use this moment while they have even more attention and time to train them, that will serve you well for the next 15 years. And so this is a really big opportunity to set yourself up for not just immediate success, but ongoing success. And then there's been some discussion in the chat that I just wanted to echo, which is there's a really interesting trend happening right now with older donors and older folks generally, which is if you had expected tech adoption among this demographic, we're basically at levels at 2030 where we might have been without this, and instead we're there this year. And so the amount of comfort that older folks are having with technology, instead of, it's been on this sort of general trend, and it's gone up like that in the last 3 months. And people are deeply investing in helping their parents, helping their older relatives learn this. And so people have been continually surprised when they talk to us about how successful they've been on digital events, on digital tools with older donors. So Tiffany, thank you so much. Stick around. We'll be back in like 10, 12, 15 minutes for more questions. And I'm sure there's a lot of them for you. But this was really great. And thanks for sharing your
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to tack on a couple more strategies just to share that we've been thinking about a lot here. And then we'll come back to questions and answers for anything you like. So first strategy over here, on top of the keeping it short and sweet, which Tiffany really stuck in on, was do not postpone events. Timing is highly uncertain overall. You may end up with multiple postponements, which is the worst case scenario. It's also the case that postponement will delay your next event. And so you're just ending up with less money over the course of the next 2 years. So please don't postpone events, because you may end up just totally stuck without really, really necessary revenue that you would have had. And also virtual events do not preclude an in-person event later. So if you have an event in August that is your sort of virtual gala, you may also, if November becomes an opportunity, have an actual gala then, and people won't feel like they've already attended it, because you have this very different, much shorter, less travel, less dress up event. And so that's a big opportunity. So big, but you can actually power through and have a lot of success. Second, our third topic is you can consider adding additional events. Usually summer is just out the window for folks. People are on traveling, etc. But because vacations will be significantly fewer in 2020, and even if people are on vacation, they still need things to do. And so out of town doesn't matter. People will have their laptops, have Zoom, be ready to engage from the Hamptons or the Lake region or whatever it might be. And so there's a really big opportunity here that doesn't exist when you're only an in-person. And so it's another opportunity and an upside. And so overall, our sense would be that if you have the capacity to do so, you might want to continue virtual and fundraising events, so stewardship and fundraising events all virtually at the same pace you would in fall and spring, which is a highly different strategy than you would have most times. But it's something that you should keep in mind. And adding 1 or 2 additional events may be the difference between making goals, exceeding goals, or missing them. So this is a big moment here. Next tip. You want to pay extra attention to accessibility. So on top of anything written, handwritten, et cetera, you want to make sure invites come by email. On the RSVP, when people are signing up, ask if they expect to need help. So you can always call them the night before, the day before, the morning of, and walk them through things. You want to have a phone number for dial-in if people can't join by video. It's not going to be as good, but having some presence there will be really useful. On the day of the event, you want to email extremely explicit instructions, including screenshots. Sometimes people give overly fancy invitations that are harder to read or harder to navigate. This is not fancy time. It's time for extreme clarity and saying, okay, press this button, put your name in, press this button, turn your camera on with an arrow to the camera button. That's the level of granularity that you'll want to be delivering so that people not just can get it right, but that it's hard to get wrong. And if you want to try this on some of your friends that are not as tech savvy and see if they can follow the instructions and figure out where they get hung up, and so you can tweak the invite a little bit. We also recommend Zoom, although there's a lot of great tech out there, because it's the most familiar to the most people, and it doesn't require a download or anything else. So that's a big thing, is to take as few steps, have as few steps as possible in the process. And then lastly, this is really important. You want to have some volunteers on hand 30 minutes before and even 15 minutes into the gala to call people who need help and walk them through joining. And so this is a great additional volunteer opportunity if you want to engage people and bring them closer to the organization. And so you might want to run a quick training for these people, but most people who've used Zoom 5 or 6 times will be able to do this and help somebody else. Okay, big other shift in gala fundraising is that for fundraising events, you really want to make sure you have options for donor advised funds, for stock giving, for qualified charitable distributions, which are giving out of your IRA. Virtual events can fully be paid for by this, whereas many gala events cannot. And many people know this, but just to be clear, you can't pay for a gala ticket with a donor advised fund if you're getting a fancy meal and wine and cocktails with it, because that money is tax deductible, and so you can't receive something of value. The same way you can't buy basketball tickets at your alma mater with a donor advised fund. Now, in a virtual event, for most people, in almost all cases, and feel free to check with your accountant if you're unsure, there will be no real value, quote unquote, from a taxable standpoint that you can use. And so you can have them paid with more tax advantage ways to do so. A couple big tips here. 1, this makes the gift larger. 2, it really helps you track who has donor advised funds or who has qualified charitable distributions they're ready to make, and builds that mechanic into their future giving, where those gifts will be larger in the future. So this is a really big opportunity, and make sure that you're providing that avenue to purchase tickets. I just said that. Another quick note on stock giving, because we get a lot of questions about this. And what we heard is people are sort of afraid to ask for stock gifts right now because the market's been so volatile. So this is a quick snapshot, and it might even be 2 days ago that we took it, and the market's been even up further. And so most of you are not following this full time. We are, because we're paying attention to the macroeconomic climate and how it affects donors. But what you see is that actually, and this isn't perfectly reflected in the graph, stocks are up overall for 2020. So just say it again, stocks are up overall for 2020. So if you were asking for stock gifts in January, you should be asking for stock gifts now. Most people will have some significantly appreciated assets, and this is one of the most underrated ways to give because it provides the biggest tax advantage to a donor. You can get up to basically 50% returns in your taxes by making a gift, and so whenever possible, you want people to be giving appreciated stock. So keep that in mind and don't be afraid of it, which is something we are seeing from a lot of major gift officers. Point number 5, think really big on speakers. So you may have a sort of typical idea of who would come to talk or greet your group, but virtual events are much easier for big names to join. And many of these people have more freedom than they've ever been, right? So they have fewer things to do, and they don't have to actually show up in your community and get on a plane and be paid a lot of money to do so. So start early and make a dream list now. It's not likely that you're going to get, Tom Brady or Oprah or Barack Obama, but certainly the mayor of your town, some prominent actors and actresses, singers, musicians, whoever you think people would really love to hear from, the odds of these people who are going to say yes is considerably higher than it's ever been. And this is a really cool opportunity. So think about that. These folks are also stuck at home and might be really welcoming of an invite. And if it's only a 10 or 15-minute appearance over Zoom, where all they have to do is put on a nice shirt, it could be something that brings them a lot of joy and brings your attendees a lot of joy. So don't undershoot yourself here. It's also the case that video messages from someone well-known or famous are very easy, and a video message is going to feel pretty similar to someone showing up on Zoom, in way more than it would in a non-virtual context. So even if all you're asking is, hey, can we have a 2-3 minute video message about why mission X is so important, that would be a really cool thing for your supporters to see, and something that makes this event really memorable. So one little tactic that we like here is there's something called Cameo.com. Some of you have heard of it. Most of you probably haven't. Go check it out. Obviously, we're not affiliated or anything with Cameo. This is just a cool idea for you all. But it has a lot of celebrities, actors, athletes, musicians, etc., who will record a short message for not a lot of money. So some of you may recognize the gentleman on the right. This is Andre Dawson, who is a former star for the Chicago Cubs, one of the more famous baseball players of the, I think, late 80s, early 90s, MVP award winner, Hall of Famer, etc. And so some friends and I organized, chipped in a little bit each to create a video from Andre Dawson to my friend John, who was leaving New York and moving to Chicago. And it blew John's mind. The total cost, I believe, was $70. So a bunch of us chipped in $15, $20 each. And it was one of the best gifts we've ever given. And so for your event, you can do the same thing. And for less than $100, you can get some pretty big names to give a shout out to your organization and all the important work you're doing. If you want to shout out a particular attendee or a particular group of donors, this is a really cool thing. It's very, very little work. It's very, very little money, and it will add some spice to everything. Right. Last point is making space when you can for small group engagement. So Zoom and other services have functionality for what we call breakout rooms that allow people to meet in small groups. So if you have if you have hundreds of people at your event, there's no way in which you can unmute everybody and actually have them talk to each other. That would be a disaster. But you can create breakout rooms of groups of 4 or 3. Usually these will be 3 or 4 couples, or some people will be couples and some people will be single, some people will be families. You want to have them turn video and sound on, and actually just say, introduce yourself and then share why you're here, why you're excited to be here. And having people vocalize that excitement for why they're here actually makes them much more excited. Once they're able to share with other people, it's a way to really lock in that feeling and lock in the memorable event, and probably inspires people to give more as well. You only want to do this for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, and then just bring everybody back. But give really clear instructions, and having that moment of interactivity and meeting new people is going to make it a really great event for a lot of folks. All right, so those are our tips. We're going to get to questions in a moment. A few things. All these available resources are here for you. Phone scripts, email scripts. We're also going to provide a PDF of the run of show sample that Tiffany shared. So that was really thoughtful for her to put together for you all, and really happy to be sharing it. So check that out. We'll send it around with the recording later today. Also, some folks have been asking about previous group demos for planned and major giving tools, and some case studies about how people are using this effectively. So that will be on Thursday at 1 p.m. Feel free to sign up in the survey if you like. And then we talked about this a little bit, but if folks want to ask us whether they've seen any bequests to their organization through FreeWill as gifts continue to grow, just shoot us a note, or we'll send you the link for a sign up in order to be connected with someone, and we'll let you know if they're new donors to Steward. So a lot of people have really appreciated that and taken advantage of it. And that is it. So next steps, in the Q&A box, start adding any questions. My colleague Simone, who again puts a ton of work into each of these every week, so thank you, Simone, is dropping a survey in the Zoom chat. And so we'd really love to hear from you about what can be better, what you liked, whether you need CFRE credits, and to note that, whether you want to sign up for the group demo, etc. So please fill it out. In 2 weeks, we're gonna try to do this well, and we're gonna give our best effort on clear steps to improve diversity and inclusion at your organization. So we'll have some great speakers and share some really tactical tips on things you can put in action pretty quickly to do that as well. So looking forward to that. Next week is no webinar. We're gonna take a bit off. And then if you have creative ideas to share, or if you need anything at all, just feel free to shoot me an email. And also, if you want to reach out to Tiffany, either to say thank you, that was great, or in order to work with Perry Davis on anything, or just to say hi, you can reach her at tiffany@perrydavis.com. So feel free to add some questions. We have a bunch coming in, and I'll direct some of these to Tiffany as well. Okay, Tiffany, first question from Kathy. Let me unmute you to make sure you are
Thank you.
excellent. Kathy says, I have a big annual event in November. Do you think people will be tired of virtual events by then?
Very good question. Definitely, I think many people have experienced fatigue in one way or another. I think to avoid that is really putting thought into what would excite your specific donor constituency about the event. Is it this dream speaker that you've been dying to have the past few years that now might be more accessible? Is it these various activities or engagement opportunities? Really putting thought into what will excite people to attend is going to be your key. Virtual events, it is the recommended choice right now. Again, do not lose it. So I think putting valuable thought into that prep work and what your donors would like to see and would benefit from will avoid that.
Kaylee has a question on survey data. I'll take this one. For the virtual event goal data, were these goals adjusted for virtual events or based on the in-person event goal? And my understanding is that they were based on the in-person event goal. So you do see a third of organizations surpassing their in-person event goal. Some of these are that more people can actually make it. Fewer people are just busy next Thursday than they would be otherwise. And so there are some big opportunities there. Obviously, some people miss their goals, which is why Tiffany's expertise is so important here. And Jessica asks, what are you thinking about meeting goals of events next year? So now 2021. We feel good about this year, but we are gloomy about the future. Would you do more smaller events or one big event when people are used to having one big stewardship event in the fall? Tiffany, do you have an opinion here?
I would say to answer that question, you need to understand how to define your goals. Again, what do your supporters look to in terms of that one big event? Is it these impressive honorees or speakers, the exclusivity of the event? Was it the networking opportunities? Was it feeling proud and positive about their involvement? And so that's something that they want to continue to feel. So I think identifying and defining your goals as it relates to your big event. And then also understanding who attends your big events. If you can identify different constituencies, perhaps you can create smaller events that dive even deeper and serve them in different ways. So really taking a step back, surveying your board and your stakeholders to understand how to move forward.
That makes sense. I love this question from Barbara. Does it make sense to do a standard ad journal that would be mailed out in advance of the event? So in many cases, for folks listening, you'll have a program or something else and people are taking out full page ads, etc. So you could do that. And if people know that, if sponsors know this will be going to 1,000 folks, mainly high net worth, you can really pitch it. And you do have a little bit of additional costs on mailing, but really it's not that high. Another idea that we've heard a little bit of, and we really love, is that you could create an event poster the way a movie poster might exist. That is really, you'd have to pay a designer for this, but a really thoughtful and well designed. And you could have the sponsors' names be on the poster as long as it looks really good. And so then the new pitch is, we're going to send this out to everybody. They're probably going to have it in their homes for years to come. Do you want to be an ongoing presence there? And so there are interesting ways to be creative about this that brings even more value to the sponsors and is actually quite cool for your attendees as well. So really like that.
Patrick, can I add to that quickly? Because I've actually had experience pre-COVID with live e-journals, and they are a big hit for donors. It's this instant gratification of seeing their ad online. They can send the link to their friends. They can constantly see, who's being involved, what are the messages. So I do recommend considering a live e-journal that you have a staff member update at least weekly, and then perhaps more frequently leading up to the event. It's a great tool.
Yeah, that's a great idea and a great way to build excitement on social media as you sort of feature new ads, etc. Great idea. This is a question that I think a lot of people ask, and Tiffany, you might not have an answer, but I don't have an answer. So feel free to give it a shot or pass. We're very interested in how to approach corporate event sponsorships with virtual events. What benefits might we offer to a corporate event sponsor?
Yeah, I have put some thought toward this. I think a great benefit would be creating a video that gives your corporate sponsor FaceTime with your audience, a video that aligns the mission of the organization with the mission of the corporation, of the company, and that's something that you can host on your website, also send out in an email blast. You can include that as a part of a sponsorship package, because they're getting that visibility the same way that they would perhaps the night of the event. So I think that adds value.
That's great. We have 4 pages of questions and 2 minutes-ish to go. So let's close with one more, which I think is very tactical and people will be able to act on. Marion asks, do you have any thoughts on day or evening event time? When do these events actually happen?
Event start time is important. For a larger, I like the evenings. I think many people have conflicting priorities during the day, although increasingly at night as well, as everyone's at home. You want your donors and your attendees to feel relaxed, and often that's at the end of a workday, even if it's a remote workday. Typically at a time, if you want to think about if many of your constituents have younger children, then perhaps it's later in the evening so that they can enjoy the event after bedtime. Maybe if your event is food related and you're okay with everyone enjoying their dinner and providing entertainment, it could be during dinner time. But day events are harder because many people are still working from home and remotely, and it's hard to shut off and pay attention to your event if it's during the day. It's a little tougher.
That makes sense. And Marion, we've heard specifically that a lot of folks are doing about 8 p.m., which is a little bit later than you might start a normal gala, but because it ends earlier, it's fine. So that gives people a chance to feed their kids. And if they're super young, put them to bed, but also be present and sort of settle in. And then if you are, 8 p.m. is also pretty decent if you are a nationwide organization, or 8 or 8:30, so that you may have some folks starting at 5 or 5:30, if it's 8:30 Eastern time and 5:30 Pacific. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree. My run of show, it starts at 8 p.m. I think it's a sweet spot.
And that run of show will be available afterwards. So let's wrap up there. There's another 4 pages of questions, which to me means that we'll pick through those and potentially do another session on virtual events to answer more and more of those and give more advice.
Yeah, definitely.
So big thanks for joining us. It's really great to have you, but also just thanks for everyone in what is a difficult and challenging week. And I know you have lots of responsibilities, both to yourselves, to your teams, and to all the mission that you're carrying out. So really appreciate you spending some time with us and look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, FreeWill.
Talk to you guys soon.
Well, everyone. Take care.